told me to just be quiet and do it myself. And then he was watching me. So I think I'm okay. All right, we're starting. Let me get us down. Okay, here we go. All right. I think we stopped at Hosea. So we had introduced the prophets for those who are here a little later. Let me see. Yeah, I think I'm okay. All right. For those who weren't here last week, we introduced what we call the prophets. So prophets were called lots of different things. Prophets, seers. Let me back up a little bit. This is where it's going to get interesting. You know, there's always that one, right? You know, I've thought about that. Penny, would you go get him one more time? Everything looks so good.
I think he wasn't going to be in there.
Oh, well, he wasn't. He might have been taking his kids.
I think I already told John he wasn't going to be there.
Okay. Some of the terms, we could start on this. So some of the terms that we used were a seer, or one who's called of God. Some of the prophets were called, in addition to being prophets, they were also called man of God, a messenger, servant of the Lord. Ezekiel's called watchman. If you notice, there's a lot of seeing involved. That the prophets are the seers and the spokespersons of God. And so they were to be that conduit. And again, my brother's coming. I did something again. So when I ran over the thing, only one thing showed up. So, like, see, only one.
Because you're on OBS. Go to the PowerPoint one.
Okay.
Right next to it. To the right. Yep.
That's the one.
There you go.
Okay.
And then now you should be going to check it. Go ahead and make sure it works.
Oh.
Yep.
You know, him having small kids have given him patience that for older ones. So as we see here, let me back up a bit. So the prophets, like they had priests, right? Back in the Mosaic law, all of that. But why would God send prophets? Because prophets weren't there at the beginning. Remember how we talked about, for those who were here last week, why did God have to send prophets? Or he chose to send prophets?
Shake them up.
To shake them up. Yes, because they weren't listening to the law. And I think sometimes spiritually, if we get into routines, a lot of times we can just kind of settle in, but we need a jolt every so often. When I was growing up, what do we call those jolts? Remember, these days, this is old school, so pardon old people language, okay? So just help us on this one. But it was called revivals. Remember those? And it looked like every year we had a 2-week revival or 1-week revival, and it seems like it just jolted the people. Then with youth, they have denounce, they have lock-ins. You know, it seems like something needed to be thrown in to kind of shake things up. Because what happens to us? We kind of get comfortable. In fact, I was talking to another pastor, just pastoral training, walking through that. Sometimes God, every 3 to 5 years, it seems like either God shakes up the church or something happens in order to keep the church on its toes a bit. And so it just... sometimes we need that. And so the prophetic voice is not always kind as far as gentle and permissive. It's provocative and it stirs you to action. And so, again, we've talked about different types of pastors, and there's all kinds of different leaders. Some pastors are more pastoral, shepherding, kind, edifying, and it just seems to be their heart. But some have more of a prophetic role. Call people to action, get people out of their comfort zone. And so, or you can have a combination of both. It doesn't mean you're always exclusively one, but usually you feel more comfortable at one end of the spectrum. But again, the messengers were coming in. What was the final prophet that led into Jesus Christ, who was prophesied by Malachi? The prophet right before Jesus who prepared the way? John the Baptist. And he was just like Elijah kind of feel, right? Out there eating locusts, wild honey, living in the desert, calling the religious establishment to repentance, calling them, you brood of vipers. You kind of get the sense that he wasn't politically correct. He wasn't popular in that sense. And so, again, prophet. Any questions overall on prophets? It's prophets. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think about Nathan and one very, not necessarily the church, but one super important individual that would help or that would be leading the nation at the time, like David.
So important. I'm not going to give the name, but a long-term member here. So just look at that. So we were kind of having a discussion on the accountability of a pastor. Okay. And I said, who do I answer to? And he said, the congregation. I said, but who do I turn my my self-review into? The whole congregation, like on Sunday morning, that we put it in the worship bulletin? And, and he said, probably not. And he said, is it the personnel committee? Is it the deacons? Is it, who is it? And his thing was, I don't want to evaluate the man of God. Very respectful, by the way. And I said, we need to be evaluated. That we don't have the luxury of not being accountable. And this is what's gotten a lot of churches in trouble, right? When there's no accountability, or they get, I won't say so much power, but they've been there long enough and they put themselves in a position where nobody feels like they can touch them, or they feel like they can't be touched. And human nature, David, remember, this is when he fell, when everything was going well. And who was he accountable to? And thank God Nathan was there. But if you look at Nathan, and have another prophet by the name of Gad that would speak into him later, but if you look at comparison between David and Solomon, you don't see a prophetic voice speaking into Solomon that many times. So I think it is wise for husbands, fathers, leaders to make sure that you're accountable some way. So anyway, prophetic, yes.
I have a question.
Thank you for that.
You have Ezekiel, the son of man.
Yes.
We're have been in the study of Matthew for some time, and this was, the Son of Man was used 30 times in Matthew. That and when it was used, it was Jesus referring to himself. And I'm just wondering if there's some type of correlation with Ezekiel.
Absolutely. There's two Son of Man really kind of use. Ezekiel's one, and Daniel's the other. Ezekiel exemplified like the prophetic voice because he would obviously speak about things. But when you get to Daniel chapter 7, and that's really, I think, the catchpin for the Son of Man title for Jesus, because in that same Daniel chapter 7, when talks about the Son of Man, he's also called the Ancient of Days. And he's the one sitting on the throne. But Ezekiel, the Son of Man, also compared to Son of God. Okay, Son of God emphasizes his deity, right? But Son of Man emphasizes his connection and his relationship with humanity. So he definitely tied into Ezekiel, no doubt. Servant to humanity. But the Son of Man used in Daniel also has the Ancient of Days. So it has kind of the deity attached to the Son of Man. Where this Son of Man with Ezekiel would not be a deity title. It would just mean I'm serving humanity. Okay? I think, Penny, did you have something about the son of? Was it you that were talking to me about the sons? The prophets.
Yes.
Very good. So I know it was with Elijah, right?
Yes.
Okay. So there was, hey guys, the son of prophets. A lot of times we think, are they about like, did that prophet have busy? Like how many children did he have? Like there was like 50 in the school in the sons of prophets. But a lot of times the word son was that you're underneath them, that you're kind of a student. So again, as a learner. Okay, so that was more. But again, the Hebrew language and the way they catch things, that son can also mean you're just underneath the one who's ahead of you, and you're going to learn from that person. So great question, Son of Man. Any other questions on prophets or thoughts? We're going to go slow today. Is that okay? Preferred. Okay, we got it. Last week we classified the prophets. Two ways to classify them: former and latter, major and minor. Again, both are okay. Not one's right and one's wrong, but it's just different ways of categorizing prophets. Former means obviously the earlier ones. Latter But former for the Jews, and this is a Jewish breakdown of prophets. They don't use major and minor. They use former and latter. And the reason is all the ones from basically Joshua on all the way through Chronicles are the former judges. Now, again, when we think of word judge, and obviously the book of Judges is in there, and Samuel's a judge, and that's 1st and 2nd Samuel. So, but we would call that a historical books, okay? But they just put former prophets. And then we use the word prophet mainly with the major and the minor. Major is based on what in minor? Importance? Length. Yeah, length. And so there's 4 major prophets in those: Ezekiel, Daniel, Isaiah, and Jeremiah. So, and all the rest are minor in that sense. All right. Yes. He's not a prophet. He's going to be in what they call the writings. Yeah. And again, the way we think of writings, we would think of maybe Psalms and Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Nehemiah is kind of a narrative book, and Ezra, but they're put into the writing category. Jewish thinking is more like what doesn't fit goes into the other category. Okay, so that's kind of how they start with the law, 5 books, and everything else kind of goes into some very unusual categories. Then we come to the first prophet, because there are 4 8th century prophets. Okay, and by the way, this outline's also on our resource material online if you need it. Okay, so if you're on our app and that. So who are the 4 prophets in the 8th century BC? Anybody? Hosea is one. Anybody remember his contemporaries? And if you don't, it doesn't matter. It's okay, but I'm just wondering if you knew. And prophets that have writings in it, like these are books. 2 are in the northern kingdom, and 2 are in the southern kingdom. They're big ones. Does that help? That is a big one, but that's a little bit later. Isaiah. So Isaiah's in the south, along with a guy by the name of Micah. Hosea and Amos are in the north. Now, when we say north and south, if you remember, the north is when the northern kingdom divided. Remember when the kingdom split? Anybody remember the dates? This is a good one. See, I love this group because you're older and you have better memories than our younger people. So, because y'all have had more things to practice on remembering. So this, which one? Very good. So 922 BC is when the kingdom split into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. So when we say northern kingdom, it's only in existence for 200 years, 922 to 722 BC. Okay, so this guy was in the north, in what we would call the 700. So right when the northern kingdom, he started a little bit earlier, during the reign of Uzziah. I'm sorry, he started before the kingdom split. So he's from 753 to 715. So he saw the fall of the northern kingdom, and he's in the northern kingdom. So his perspective and Amos's perspective is going to be radically different than Isaiah and Micah, because they're in the part that's going to receive the judgment of God first. Now, the outline is 1 through 3 is kind of like a personal narrative of the life of the prophet, and chapters 4 through 14 are prophecies. So we kind of get a life story in Hosea, and then we get his preaching. So it's kind of like bio, then his teaching or the things he wants to convey. Historical background. Early part was going well. You got Jeroboam there for 40 years. You got Uzziah there for 40 years. Usually, unless it's Manasseh, when there's a long reign in either the northern and the southern kingdom, it's usually continuity and stability. Doesn't always guarantee godliness, but there is some sense of stability. But then, in 722, things change, right? And so the northern kingdom becomes a part of the Assyrian Empire. The religious situation, they didn't discard Yahweh in the worship of God, but they added other elements. Does that sound familiar? Kind of like where we are now, very syncretistic, isn't it? Well, we do church, but then we worship entertainment, we worship travel, we worship Hollywood, we worship games, we worship work, we worship whatever cultural thing. Sometimes even politics gets thrown in there too. So again, we're probably not in a group that would ever exclude Yahweh, but we may have the tendency to add. And so this is what's going on. But here it went extreme to Baal worship And I think we've talked about Baal a little bit with Elijah and all the practices there. It's amazing when you worship. I was just doing some extra reading on idols this past week. Gods, with a little g, not the God. Their gods were a lot of human traits with what we would call tanked up a bit to be superhumans. Like they were human enough to be identified, but they weren't so godly, like so beyond that they couldn't identify them. They had power to control storms and things like that, but it felt like they could be controlled. Like if you offered a sacrifice, you can manipulate that God. So it's kind of an in-between between Yahweh, who's all sovereign, between humans. And so these gods that they have, they made idols that look like it so they could be managed. Like you could see them and they take a form. So it's an interesting idea that these idols that they had may not be that far from our idols in the fact that the things that we worship, we think we can control sometimes, like our work, our school, our relationships, and we can manipulate those and change those. So it may not be as different as it was back then. Again, the Baal worship was cyclical view of history, which means history kind of repeats itself, and the gods were a part of nature, so not beyond nature. They were part of it. Social condition, just like every third world country, high affluence and low poverty. So there's a gap between the two. Usually the common person was living hand to mouth. Not a lot of what we would call in our society middle class. Now, Hosea literally means salvation. Remember when Jesus walked into the streets of Jerusalem on Palm Sunday? What did all the crowds say? Hosanna, Hosanna. So that's the same root. So it means salvation, salvation. We see this in the book of Revelation. In Revelation 19, when the Lamb of God comes, there's 4 hallelujahs in Revelation chapter 19. So again, salvation, Hosanna, Hosanna. Then this is the interesting one. Can I tell you, I'm glad I'm not Hosea? Because you're going to see the next line. God calls him to be a prophet, and what does he tell him to do? Go marry a prostitute, a harlot. Where do you start with that? Now, one prophet is never going to be able to marry, Jeremiah. Ezekiel has his wife killed as an example, not killed, but dies as an example, and he can't mourn. So somehow between prophets and their wives, it gets a little confusing. Sometimes they're examples. Sometimes they're like symbols of or something that God's going to use to communicate. Like Jeremiah couldn't have a wife because it was time to exile. Ezekiel's wife died and couldn't mourn because God's not going to mourn because when the people walk away from him. Now, there's another story in this. So he marries Gomer. By the way, if you're a prostitute, you could have probably picked a better name, maybe. So I'm not sure. Gomer. How many of y'all remember? Yeah. I'm that old. You need to look at old reruns in the back. Just Gomer Pyle and Sergeant Carter and all of that stuff. So I'm stuck with that. So it's messed up my mind when it comes to Gomer. But Gomer is the name of the harlot. So he marries, and not only now again, if you're a prophet and you're holy and you have to marry a prostitute, I could think that there may be some variables that could maybe make this okay. We could have a platonic relationship. We could just be kind of, an outward form. But no, he says this: go and have children. So no platonic relationship here. So he's going to have 3, or she's going to have 3 children. The first one is going to be named Jezreel. Now, you may or may not know this, but in Israel there is a Jezreel Valley. Okay, so that's it. But it literally means God scattered. So let's look at Hosea. I'm going to spend a little time here. And by the way, in the fall of next year, we're going to go through Hosea in the sermons. So just to kind of give you a heads up on that. It's one of my, not favorite in the fact that it's one of my most profound prophecies when it comes to the love of God. So Hosea chapter 1 and verses 4 and 5, if somebody could read this. This is Jezreel, firstborn. Anybody could read that for me?
And the Lord said to him, call his name Jezreel, For in just a little while I will punish the house of Jehu for the blood of Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. And on that day I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel.
So here it is, Valley of Jezreel, break the element of war, scatter the people. So again, usually God's calling his people to come together, but because of God's judgment, he's going to scatter. So first child names God's action, what God's going to do. Then we come to verse 6. Well, this, I don't know, this may be the worst one. Anybody want to pick up verse 6? It's the second child. It's a girl. Anybody want to read that for me?
She conceived again and bore a daughter, and the Lord said to him, Call her name No Mercy, for I will no more have mercy on the house of Israel to forgive them at all.
And in the original, it says Lo Ruhama. Every time you hear the word lo in the Old Testament, it means no. So whatever word, it negates it. So you have mercy, and then you put the word no in front of it. Now, how would you like to? A girl. I mean, I have 3 boys, and I can tell you, I can name them No Mercy. And I wouldn't blink an eye. But I have only one granddaughter, and I saw her in the video today, and I'm telling you, it's hard for me to say No Mercy on that one. The girl does something to you, right? It provokes a warmth. There's a tenderness there. Guys, I don't know. It has a different effect on me. But No Mercy, which means God's not going to have mercy on Israel because he's given them multiple chances. And this is not, I think we forget this as our study in the Old Testament. Sometimes we pick up books and we forget the time frame. God has been with them since Abraham 2000 BC. 1440, there's an Exodus, and the law's given. 1400, Joshua comes into the conquest. Then we have the period of the judges, right? Then we have King David, 1000 BC. Solomon, all of that stuff. Now we're coming down to the 700s. So it's not like God just like, oh, you just blew it. They've generation after generation after generation. People who should know better. So it's not like he did not give mercy before, over and over and over and over again. And I don't know, I think we've been a recipient of mercy because how many times have we not deserved it and God found us? And how many chances has God given each of us, right? So again, we can look at it all kinds of different ways, but I think if we look at it in the historical context, we catch the gravity and the breadth of God's patience with us. But now you know, how many of you as parents say, okay, that's the last time, it's the last, like at some point there's a limit, right? Isn't there? Grandparents, we have no limits, right? But as a parent now, that's different. There is a line that we draw. We put that in the sand. But God has given them so many. So no mercy. Then we come to verses 8 and 9. Tim, I really appreciate you reading it, but I want to spread the route there. Someone else helps out. Verses 8 and 9 of Hosea chapter 1.
And when she had weaned,
oh, I know, that's a hard one. Yeah.
She conceived and bore a son, and God said, Call his name Lo Ami. For you are not my people, and I will not be your God.
So again, Lo means no. Now remember AM. Now we call it either AM or we call it 6 a.m., 7 a.m. So that's our AM, right? But in the original text, it means people. So, but you put the word me, it's like Spanish, like mi casa. Okay, that's the same one. Mi means my. So literally it means no people mine. Okay, but if you put it in our language that we understand, not my people. Before you were my people, then you put the word no in front of it. So this is a big, big shift. Now, there's so much debate on this, and I would actually have a tendency to believe it because when we come back and we pick up in Hosea chapter 3, when it looks like she has the babies, but she goes back into adult prostitution. So it's not specified here, so it's argument from silence, but it's argument from silence from both ways. We know it's her baby, but it may not be his baby. So it may be when she says, not my people, literally, that baby that Gomer has, number 3, may not be Hosea's baby. Because we do know that she went back into prostitution. You kind of feel that, right? Now, if you're a prophet, obviously we're all sinners. So prophets are not sinless. No doubt about that. Don't ever mistake that. But the problem and the challenge is if you let you're going to say, okay, I'm going to do what God tells me to do. I'm going to marry a prostitute. I'm not going to make it a platonic relationship. It's going to actually be an intimate relationship. We're going to have babies. We have 2. But if she goes back, we all have limits. If we extend it like maybe that openness to receive her the first time, but then she goes back into that, to me, I believe it might even be harder than the first one by far. Crossing that line first time is tough, right, for a prophet. But then to know that she went back into that and maybe that she has a child that doesn't belong to you. And again, what do you call them? Can you imagine Hosea? Hey, not my people. We're having breakfast. And literally he may not be Hosea's. Tough. But I don't, there's so many ways to look at this, right? You look at it from God's perspective. I'm not pretending or ever pretend how I know how God feels. But from your perspective, what do you think God is thinking with these 3 children and how they were conceived and what he told Hosea to do? And Gomer going back into prostitution and the 3rd baby comes. What do you think God's trying to convey? Any guesses?
I'm wondering if Hosea had a hearing problem when he was called to go.
He would have to doubt that first call, right?
Yeah, I do.
I'm with you. And there's nobody in KFBC that has hearing problems, so I don't think anybody can relate to this at all. So, yeah. Thank you. I think you're right, Bill. I think that would come across mine. Anything else, Tim?
Always pursuit.
Yeah. But the fact that he's even sending a prophet to send this message, like to me, if he's written them off, like, why bother? And yet he's still trying to communicate them even to the last part. He's explaining to them about what he's about to do. But he hasn't quite done it yet because he's still prophesying, right? The northern kingdom hasn't fallen yet. So again, we come to chapter 3. Let's go to chapter 3. This is a very interesting little chapter. I'll read this in verse 1. It says, "Then the Lord said to me, go again and love a woman who is loved by her husband, yet an adulteress, even as the Lord loves the sons of Israel, though they may turn to other gods and love raisin cakes." Go love again. We can look at it again from several different angles, and I think we could get stuck with like our unfaithfulness, and we're what I would call repeat offenders many times. We end up committing the same sin, and God keeps forgiving us. And we commit the same sin, and God forgives us. And so we're not out of that realm. But maybe tonight, my prayer is that we would see the heart and the love of God. That God says, go love again. I'm going to give them another chance, another opportunity to walk with me again. And not only that, look what he says. So I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and a homer and a half of barley. Now, you may be just like, okay, that's the kind of like the going price. But what's the going price for a slave or somebody on the market? And we do have some help if you go to when Jesus was betrayed. So you kind of have the price of that. Anybody remember what the price of a normal slave would be? 30 pieces of silver, right? But look what he pays with. He pays with 15. And then he doesn't have enough money. So he has to barter. So you have to go buy your wife back, your wife who cheated on you, that she was a harlot to start with. And then she empties your bank account. She wipes you out of all your cash. You liquidate it. You're gone. Now you're looking at like your other merchandise that you have that you could use at what I would call as an agricultural pawn shop. Mm-hmm. So you're cashing in like these other items that you may have in order to what? Buy her back? You mean I have to pay for her mistake? Sometimes we deal with divorce and unfaithfulness, and it always seems, I know it's not always, but it seems like the one who cheats is the one who wins. It seems like the one who has Christ and trying to love, forgive, be patient with them, be kind, be merciful, hope that person comes back, and the other one just takes off with everything. It seems like the victim of, or not, the one that's received the most hurt pays the highest price. And this is a good example of that. Hosea is paying a price for her sin. It wasn't his sin, it was her sin. Then we'll get to this when we get to preaching through Hosea. So I'm just giving you this is what we call, if y'all watch like series out of Netflix, these are like just these little teasers that you'll come back next year when we preach through it, okay? But look what he says to her. It's kind of interesting. Look at verse 2. Then I said to her, you shall stay with me for many days. You shall not play the harlot, nor shall you have a man, and I will also be towards you. So even though she's restored, there's also a period that there's not going to be intimacy until things get clear. So a lot of times in relationships, when we're trying to restore relationships, when there's been unfaithfulness, a lot of times people say, well, I said I'm sorry. And they think everything's good. But there has to be a time of repentance. There has to be a time of restoration. There has to be a time of healing. And even then, it's going to take a long time. And I think this reminds us, just because we're forgiven, the consequences do not disappear. How many times do we want our sins to be forgiven and then our consequences to be removed? We think that that's actually forgiveness, is consequences being removed. I think I gave the illustration of somebody killing a little baby. Remember that? He's serving 60 years in Huntsville. And he's forgiven. He has Christ in his heart now. But he embraces. He said, I've taken a life, and this is my consequence for my sin. I know God has forgiven me. But most of the modern 21st century Christians think that their consequences should be obliterated if we ask for so-called forgiveness, right? But to me, true forgiveness and true repentance means you're willing to pay the consequences. You've done the damage, and you understand the gravity of the situation. So again, wife becomes faithless, and Hosea buys her back. Now, the question of this is did it really happen? Obviously, that was one option. The other one is it an allegory for Israel? Like, is he just kind of telling a story? Like, once there were two sons. And it's kind of like a parable. The other one, a parable. Allegory kind of like paints a picture, or is this a vision that Hosea had, like when John was lifted up into heaven, and these are the visions that he's had? Or Ezekiel has a lot of visions as well. So I will go ahead and tell you that it's written in a narrative form, like it really happened. So you'll hear that from me all the time. But I want you to know that there are other views of that as well. Any question on the introduction part of this prophecy?
Since we've been in Matthew, we're at a point in the Passion Week where Judas is and Jesus chose Judas. And here Hosea chose Gomer. We know the character of Judas, and we know the character of Gomer. And I see a parallel between somehow what we're discussing right here.
God's choices don't always make sense. It's probably not our selection as well. Yeah. All right, now we come to the message itself. So let's pick up in chapter 4, verse 1. It says, listen to the word of the Lord, O sons of Israel, for the Lord has a case against the inheritance of against the inhabitants of the land, because there is no faithfulness or kindness or knowledge of God in the land. So that's really the heart of the issue. There's no faithfulness, there's no knowledge of God, there's no kindness, there's no mercy. So everything that should be coming out of the people of God because of their covenant relationship with Yahweh is nowhere to be found. In verse 2, it says there's swearing and deception, murder, stealing, and adultery. Where's that list come from? Anybody? What's that sound like? Ten Commandments. So they're covenant breakers. In verse 6, the sad part is, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I will also reject you from being my people, my priests, since you have forgotten the law of your God. Now, when I say lack of knowledge, we're not talking about head knowledge. We're talking about what you know and what you obey. So it's not cognitive, it's experiential knowledge. So whenever you're obedient, you're experiencing knowing God. But just because you know what God says and you don't do it, that's the lack of knowledge he's talking about. That you don't fully know it because you haven't done it. So again, sometimes we, especially in the 21st century, we think the word knowledge is if we just cognitively know something and we can quote the Ten Commandments. It's kind of like the illustration I gave Sunday of a guy that wants to go to the Holy Land and shout the Ten Commandments, right, as loud as he can. And the wife said, no, I think it'd be better just stay home and do the Ten Commandments than shout them over on the other side of the world. So again, this is the heart of the issue. Any similarities as you look at no faithfulness, no knowledge, covenant breakers, no knowledge of God in the land experientially? Do you find that any parallels here? 21st century in our area? I was talking to our friend, Pastor George from Liberia. Many of you have seen him. So I had a good conversation with him. And what surprised me, Liberia has some of you may know the history of the country, but it's 5.2 or 3 million, so it's not a big country at all. He says on the stats, it says 98.5% are Christian. But the way he described it is much like Mexico or Spain or Portugal that says, or Italy, the country is Catholic. But he said they do not, they say they're Christian, but there's no personal knowledge of God. And so there's a weakness of that. I've been in Norway when there's 5 million people there too, and everybody's registered on the church roll, but there's no living knowledge of God. So they have a religion, but no relationship. So as we look at this, Israel's now slipped into a religion, but they've lost relational elements, faithfulness, knowledge, mercy, kindness, covenant keeping. Now we come to chapter 5 through 7, and it really deals with the leaders now and God's judgment. So let's pick up in chapter 6. This is if somebody could read verses 1 through 3 for me in chapter 6 of Hosea. Out loud. Let's try that.
Chapter 6?
Yeah, chapter 6, 1 through 3.
Come, let us return to the Lord. He has torn us to pieces, but he will heal us. He has injured us, but he will bind up our wounds. After 2 days he will revive us. On the third day he will restore us, that we may live in his presence. Let us acknowledge the Lord, and let us press on to acknowledge him. As surely as the sun rises, he will appear. He will come to us like the winter rains, like the spring rains that water the earth. What can I do with you, Ephraim?
Okay, that's good. That's good. Let's just stop at 3. No, great. Thank you so much. Now, if you looked at that just on the surface, does that sound good? I mean, look at some of these key phrases. Sounds like one of our sermons here, right? Come, let us return to the Lord. So it's almost like the people say, let's go back to the Lord. And then he has torn us, but there's an assumption, and I would even add the word presumption, that God will heal us. Okay, we'll return to him and he'll heal us. He's wounded us, there's acknowledged, but he will bandage us. He'll revive us in 2 days, which seems to be a short period. So maybe like, God, just take care of my problems quickly. So it is a time frame. And then it says, let us press on. So you would look at that situation and you would think that it's good. But look in verse 4. It says, what shall I do with you, O Ephraim? What shall I do with you, O Judah? For your loyalty is like the morning cloud, and your dew, which goes away early. I wish we would have dew on our land, on our grass, wouldn't you? When's the last time it's rained in Kingwood? And my wife's gone for 3 weeks with babysitting, and she plants all these flowers. And I only have one job if I choose to keep living, and it is to water the plants. And so I'm intimately acquainted with my cry to God for rain every morning. Sadly, there's not even dew on the ground anymore. So it's not even getting any moisture. But if there's dew in the ground, would that count? If I showed Sasha a picture of dew on the ground, does that count as watering? Sadly, no. I would hope it did, but it does not. So how long does dew on the ground last, and how effective is it? Does it bring in a crop? No. That's how shallow, how quick their superficial come let us return. It's almost like people who get in trouble, right? And what do? They start coming to church, right? Until the problem goes away. And then all of a sudden, you can't find them anymore. That's the dew on the ground. That's the temporary turn, whatever it might be. And it dissipates that quickly. And again, this is an agricultural community, so they understand that more than we do. I'm understanding flowers more than I did 2 weeks ago. I will tell you that. But that's not usually our cup of tea, is it? It's just, but they understand this image, like there's water on the ground, but you can't trust dew on the ground to water the crops and for it to be effective and it to be fruitful and productive. Again, why do they call them O Ephraim and O Judah? Is there a distinction between those two? And what do they represent? I didn't want to let that slip by too quick. If there's a meaning behind this. Anybody want to take a stab at that? He doesn't say Israel, he says Ephraim. And Judah's the southern kingdom, so that's the easy one, right? Ephraim represents the north. Sometimes prophets interchangeably use words to describe the northern kingdom. Sometimes it's Ephraim, sometimes it's Israel. Ephraim was a big tribe. So, like we would say, don't take this personally, Kingwood, okay? It's like saying Houston to represent Kingwood, okay? Or then we say Kingwood to represent, like a little Kingwood, represent the big Houston. So it's that interchangeable that we all know that we're part of Harris County, and all of you were jumping for joy whenever it became part of Houston, yes? Bill, were you excited when Kingwood became Houston? No. Anybody was living, who else cared? You were here, were you happy? No. I have not met one person. There may be one, but I haven't met them yet. So, yeah. It's okay, we'll leave that one to another day. So, again, there's that sense that even though Hosea is targeting Ephraim and Israel, he's not letting Judah slip either. So Judah has similar problems, and he's identifying it. The key verse, though, there's always going to be a key verse in each of the prophecies, and I would call it the theme verse. So I tell you what, let's pick up in verse 6. I'm sorry, it's I'm in the wrong chapter. Okay, now, yeah. So verse 6 is a theme verse. Who would like to read the theme verse instead of go marry a prostitute verse? Just hand them the Bible. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, go ahead.
For delight in loyalty rather than sacrifice, and in the knowledge of God rather than burnt offering.
Key verse. All of those are religious practices in some form, right? Like sacrifice and offering. Those are religious exercises, expressions. The word, though, and again, it's the hardest word to me to translate from the original language to English. And you can tell it by the translators. So here the word is loyalty. Sometimes it's loving kindness. Sometimes it's faithfulness. Sometimes it's love. But it's all the same word in the original language, and it's called hesed, H-E-S-E-D, hesed. It's such a rich word in the original language that one word, love, faithfulness, loving kindness, sometimes even mercy. Here it's loyalty. It's all of those, but it's not one of them alone. And so that's but that's the covenant faithfulness. So it's not just talking about faithfulness like, oh, I'm going to try to be better or try to do what God tells me to do. It's like a marriage. So whenever you enter into that covenant of marriage, this is for better or for worse. For richer, and I love the second one. What's for richer or for what? See, you got to hold on to that one, okay? In sickness and in health, right? So that covenant, no matter the ups and downs, it's a covenant relationship. It's not like I'm trying hard or I'm doing the best I can. It's a binding. And that's just marriage. How much more so with a covenant-making God? And so this is the word. So what does God really say? I delight, I find joy in a covenant faithfulness rather than you giving me a sacrifice. Because sacrifices can just be handed out, right? You can actually give a sacrifice in your heart. It says nothing. And you can give. And I've seen people do this. Like people give money in order not to have to give their heart. I know for us who don't always have money all of our life, we're thinking, no, it's a big sacrifice to give money. But you could actually give money without your heart being touched. And that's what he's talking about. And then he says, then I delight in the knowledge. Again, that's not head knowledge. It's intimate experiential knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. And burnt offerings, remember what burnt offerings represent? Because y'all are Old Testament scholars now, since y'all been in this class. What did burnt offering represent? It's interesting that he uses burnt offering, not like guilt offering, sin offering, peace offering, grain offering, but he uses burnt offering. Anybody remember what that represented?
Total devotion to God.
Very good. The whole animal was burned and nobody could eat it. No priest and no worshiper. It had to all go to God, which means, and what was the symbol, and we'll get to this Sunday, Jericho. Jericho was a burnt offering to God. It represented whole total dedication and consecration of the Holy Land to God. And so now, even if you give a burnt offering, which is supposed to be representing total consecration and dedication, but now your heart and you're not experiencing the knowledge of God. There's no love relationship with him. So again, challenging. Any questions on that, Keith? I like the words, I put the word steadfast love. It kind of catches it as well, like love. But we use love so many things. Like I love, I don't know why I hear this a lot. I love the Aggies. I don't know where that comes from in this church, but it's just everywhere, right? Or I love McDonald's, or I love, J. Christopher's, or I love, whatever it might be. Or then, I love my house, or I love, then we say I love my grandchildren. Like we use the word love, right? It could be a lot of different things. But I think the word steadfast, covenant love kind of gives you the breadth and the depth of it a little bit better. Then we come to Hosea chapter 7, and it describes Ephraim, which is, again, another word for the northern kingdom. And he's going to use several different images to describe it. And I love sometimes, it's like Jesus' parables. He paints a picture, and it provokes you, right? But it makes you think. It makes you allowed to see from a different, instead of saying you're unfaithful. Let's start with the first one. So he starts with a heated oven. So instead of saying you're full of lust and your desires and your passions for things, he calls you a heated oven. So it's got a little different angle, right? He's pointing at you, but he's making it in such a way that maybe you'll listen. The second one is you're a cake not done. My wife has been in the burning passion of making bread. First couple of times, she could have left the bread in a little bit longer. A little doughy and chewy. Okay, not quite done. And have you ever had a pancake? This is my favorite illustration. Is I love pancakes. So whenever you put the pancake, how many of you have ever looked at a pancake and it's so good and you're about to eat it and you cut it and you take it and inside the batter isn't done? It's the worst, right? This is what Israel tastes like to God. It's not done. The last one is a dove. How many of y'all been dove hunting? Anybody? Yeah. I grew up in the ghetto. Didn't know what that was, but I went to a country church to pastor, and they said, Pastor, you want to go dove hunting? Sure. You shoot things? Never done that before. But we've done quail hunting, did deer hunting, did squirrel hunting, rabbit hunting, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, we ate all of those, all that kind of stuff. But then the dove, the most interesting one, because the dove never flies in a straight pattern. They're like this all the time. And so my bad shot actually got good, because what normally would have been a good shot, like for somebody who's really good with a gun, he would have missed it because the dove goes crazy, right? But because my shot was off so often, I actually hit the dove. So my shot matched the craziness of the angle of the dove. But this is what they're talking about. You're flighty. How many of you have ever had somebody that you're trying to talk about serious things and they never land? And their conversation is jumping from topic to topic. And this is what Israel's like. They can't talk about heart things. They can't talk about the spiritual things, the truths of God. So this is Ephraim. Any questions on that? Does it help you to have these images? Like I know we're not familiar all the time with a heated oven or a cake not done or a dove, but at least you know why he's saying those things. All right. One of the tragic verses in Hosea is verse 7. It says, they sow the wind and they reap the whirlwind. Remember the three laws of sowing and reaping? We did that with remember all of David, whenever that adulterous affair with Bathsheba. So the three things about sowing and reaping is you sow or you reap, that's your harvest, the same way. Kind of seed that you sow. So whatever you put in the ground, you're going to get. Number two, you always reap later, never immediate. And the last one, you start with a seed and it ends up being more. So you put in a wind, you're going to get wind, but you're going to get a whirlwind, which is bigger. But it's the same kind, but it will be later. So I think a lot of people who commit sin, if they don't get struck by lightning in the first 12 seconds, they think they're okay. They got away with it. Nobody gets away with anything. God sees it all. And this is what I think we call the injustice of God. Like we're questioning his justice, or we're calling God unjust because we don't see the punishment for the sins, whether it's sex trafficking, whether it's drugs, whether it's murder, whether it's, whatever it may be, genocide, and we think everybody's getting away with everything. But again, God, there will be a judgment day coming.
We have some politicians that have used that before.
Yep.
You weren't in the States.
No, I wasn't. I thank God that I wasn't. Many of those times, but I'm back, so I gotta get that. That's probably why we come into further warning. So let's read Hosea chapter 10, verse 12. It's one of the key verses. Somebody could read that for me. Still has that sowing in mind. Out loud. We got to get some different readers here.
Sow for yourselves righteousness, reap in mercy, break off your fallow ground, for it is time to seek the Lord till he comes and rains righteousness on you.
If that's all KFBC did, we would be good. If we would sow, that means plant with a view to righteousness. What does that mean? I think a lot of times we use the word righteousness and it's a big churchy word or Bible word, but I'm going to simplify it for us. It means to be in right relationship with God. That's all. How many of you know when you're not in right relationship with someone? Women are really good at this, right? I know sometimes, ladies, y'all may understand this more than me, but I know sometimes like when I go to bed and I'm not like, and Sasha can touch my skin. She said, "What's wrong?" I went, "What are you talking about?" She said, "I can feel it. Something's wrong." And she's just touching my skin. That's all she's doing. But she can feel, and guess what? She's right. She senses that. Like when things are not in right relationship, something's off in your very soul. And God is saying, sow with a view to be in right relationship with God. To be in right relationship with God is our goal constantly. And then it says, reap in accordance with kindness. Like this is a fruit that God's going to give us when we do. But then this is a hard one. Break up the fallow ground. We don't use the word fallow a lot, but it's ground that's been hard. It's been caked. And it breaks. It's hard to get through that soil. Yes.
My version says unplowed.
Unplowed. That means it's not receptive and tender, right? I've tried to plant one garden one time, so I'm going to let you know I'm an utter failure. But the ground was hard, and so I had to buy one of those tillers or use a tiller, and it was kind of challenging. I was talking to one of our concrete guys. I did not know this. It was Dan. Dan says, concrete gets harder every day. I went, how long does it take to dry? He said about 4 or 5 days. I said, yeah, but even then, it said it's like a proportion. Like it gets hard really fast, like in 4 or 5 days. But he says even every day it's still getting a little bit. So when you bust something up that's been 50 years of concrete, it's super, 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 super hard. I learned a new thing. So that fallow ground is that kind of hardening. The longer you're hardening, like unplowed, right? If you haven't broken that ground before, the longer it is, the harder it's going to take to break it up. And so he says, break the fallow ground. Again, trying to give the sense of we need a fresh start here. Then we get to the good chapters of Hosea. So next fall, get ready. I'm not going to say it's depressing, but it is a bit depressing. But we're going to go through it together. But we get to chapter 11. So let's pick up in chapter 11. And let's pick up verse 1. And if somebody can read verse 1 and verse 4 for me, please. just 1 and 4.
And Israel was a youth, I loved him. And out of Egypt, I called my son.
Then verse 4.
I led them with cords of a man, with bonds of love. And I became to them as one who lifts the yoke from their jaws. And I bent down and fed them.
I used to be able to catch this with my sons. Now I catch it with my grandsons. So those little ones, right? I bent down to feed them. I led them with cords of love. Like you can imagine, I got a bunch of 1-year-olds and 2-year-olds in our house now, as far as grandchildren. But they don't know where they're going a lot of times, right? They're just kind of running around. So you're watching after them, guarding them, protecting them. And this is what he's saying. He led them around. And out of Egypt, y'all were in Matthew, right, Bill? So in Matthew chapter 2, verse 5, there's a prophecy of Jesus coming back out of Egypt after fleeing Bethlehem, remember? And so this is a prophecy that is prophesied in Matthew 2:15, but it's in reference to Jesus, of all things, coming back out of Egypt. But here, out of Egypt, I've called forth my son. The original prophecy isn't a prophecy in the future, it's a prophecy in the past where God had called Israel out of bondage of Egypt. And so he's kind of using a historical image to basically say, I led you out of Egypt. And so I have never left you. I cared for you like a little baby. And then verse 8, how can I give up on you, O Ephraim? How can I surrender you, O Israel? Again, interchangeable words for the same northern tribes. How can I make you like Admon? How can I treat you like Zeboim? Again, these were 2 cities that were also destroyed. My heart is turned over within me, and all my compassions are kindled. And then he says, I will not execute my fierce anger. You almost feel the pain and the struggle of Yahweh. You deserve it, but I want to give you mercy. It's like parenting. Any of you have parenting like this? When you love them, but you need to discipline, but you discipline them, and you know it's going to be harsh, but there's a gentleness inside of you. You want to show mercy, but you need to show justice. And, it's not always clear cut. And so you get a little bit of the heart of God in this. And he just says he will not give up on us. And I love verse 9. I will not execute my fierce anger. I will not destroy Ephraim again, for I am God and not man. So powerful, powerful, powerful love statement. And the last one, let's go to Hosea chapter 14. And just verse 1 says, return, O Israel, to the Lord your God. And verse 4, I will heal your apostasy. I will love them freely, for my anger is turned away from them. So again, God's love is not always based on our action. It's not tit for tat. Yeah, we'll all be. How many of you have ever cried for justice? Anybody here ever cried for justice? I'm going to encourage you not to do that, because if you cry for justice for other people or other situations, you might need to require that for yourself. And the last time I checked, the wages of sin is death. And so justice is us being judged for our sin. Mercy is what we desperately need, and that loves us freely. But Hosea, I love Hosea, so just wanted to hang out in Hosea for a bit. Okay, any questions on this or thoughts? All right, now we come to Amos. And how many of you are in the Grace class? Anybody here in the Grace class? They're about to start Amos, I think, so with JC. But Amos is a tough book. I'm not going to lie to you. So Amos is a contemporary of Hosea as far as Northern Kingdom, same time period. So they're going to, Hosea is had to go marry a prostitute. Amos, I love him because he's a shepherd, and I always call him a fig picker. He's a dresser of figs, so he messes with figs, and he even says that. Like he says, I'm not a prophet. I'm just a normal guy. Don't put me in that category, because prophets are often targets, especially when they bring the message of judgment. So, but Amos literally means burden. How many of you would like to name your child Amos? Oh, hey, burden. It would not be so encouraging, but that's his name. And again, his prophecy was to the Northern Kingdom. He's also known as prophet of doom, deals with social justice. He's a social reformer in the best sense, not sometimes when our 21st century version of social justice is politically described and defined, that God's justice is social, spiritual, economic, all of that. So it's his view, his version is a little bit clearer. The outline. So how many of you, like if God's going to send judgment, how many of you would like for him to start with the bad people first? I think human nature, right? And how many of you already have a list that if God were to ask you, like, who deserves judgment first? How many of you would at least come up with like top 5? Okay. And I'm not going to ask you because some of them may be family members, some of them may be countries, some of them may be other political parties, some of, whatever it might be. So interestingly, God's judgment begins with with the nations. So all the enemies of Israel, God will judge. Can you imagine hearing that as a people of God? Finally, they're going to get their due. They've oppressed us. They're evil. They're idolaters. They don't follow Yahweh. We have a law. They don't. They look like they're prosperous. We're poor. Finally, God will get them. So they're all excited. Then it gets a little bit better. And again, this is an outline, but let me get to this. So Syria, Philistines, Phoenicians, Edom, Ammonites, Moabites. But then, remember, there's a little competition between the north and the south. Little jealousy going on. See, the north broke away from the south. Remember with Jeroboam? But what did the south have that the north did not, besides the dynasty of David? What else did they have? The temple, Jerusalem. So there's always jealousy. Like everyone thought they're going to always go back to the south because they have God and they have the temple. So you can almost feel like a stepbrother or a little brother complex, or just the family, the unfavorite one, right? How many of you are in a family that without a doubt you are the favorite? Just raise your hand. So, there's a brother pointing over to the sister. How many of you knew that there was a favorite and it wasn't you? Isn't it amazing? And you know what? Families know, right? They know. So there's a sibling rivalry between Israel and Judah. And so now the next judgment, besides the bad enemies, is the southern kingdom's going to get it. In a weird way, the northern kingdom's pretty excited about this. We knew they're too goody two-shoes, right? They got the temple. They think they're closer to God. But now they're going to get judged. In fact, let's read his judgment, Amos. Amos chapter 2, verse 4 and 5 with Judah. So this is what Judah. Thus says the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Judah and for 4, I will not revoke its punishment, because they've rejected the law of the Lord and have not kept the statutes. So God's going to judge them for their disobedience. So obviously the northern kingdom's happy about that. But then the longest judgment is against whom? What does it say? Israel. Man, everything was setting up so well, right? The foreign enemies, my big brother upstairs, like the holy religious one's going to get it now. And now there's 11 verses of judgment against Israel. Let's go quickly before we get into that. Let's get into why is a message of judgment against foreign nations. Okay, why would God even care? Why do we know about it? If you know the prophecy, like in Jeremiah 45 through 52 is judgment against the nations. Isaiah has a section of judgment against the nations. So these prophecies come in. That's a part of God's prophecy. Basically, God's going to judge everybody. Okay, so that's to announce judgment against all, but also to give warning. If I'm going to judge the people who don't know me, I'm going to judge the people who know me the best and still disobey me. So it's a warning. And then finally, to give comfort to Israel, like God does see your plight. If you obey me, I'm going to take care of the nations that do not pay attention. Now, there's a little interesting. This is the only place where it has it a little bit in the Proverbs. It says for 3 transgressions and for 4. So it's an idiomatic expression. So it's kind of a Jewish kind of expression, a Hebrew expression. But it does a couple things. It says, I got 3 transgressions. No, I have 4. Okay. You have 3. No, you add 1 more. So it's basically saying it's complete wickedness. Like you've got 3, no, you got 4 transgressions. So it's basically you filling the cup up and it's going over the brim. It also singles out particular nations because it starts listing every nation has a different sin, or it varies from nation to nation. If God sees 3 and 4, that means He sees it all. So nobody will escape judgment. And then He gives a description of their sins. But I'm going to throw another one in. Remember, in the Hebrew language, there's no word for holier and holiest. So if you wanted to say holiest, what do? Holy, holy, holy. So they say it 3 times in order to say what we would say in the English word holiest. Okay, there's just no word in the Hebrew for holiest. So now it says for 3, not for 4. So the same way as God is holy, holy. I think if y'all were paying attention to Aaron, our worship leader, about holy, you remember, it never does repeat righteous, 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 merciful, merciful, merciful. It only repeats holy, holy, holy about God's description. Now you got these 3 now for 4. So it means this is the ultimate limit of sin. It's over the edge because you can't get any more holier than God than holy, holy, holy. You can't get any more sinful than 3 plus 1 equal 4. So it's talking about the extreme measure. It's a very picturesque way of describing how bad the sin is. All right. Now, Judah had rejected the law. Now, these are the itemized sin. How many of y'all remember the itemized list on your tax form? I know we don't use that a lot anymore because we've had some help in that area, but y'all remember the itemized mileage, all that kind of stuff. So now there's an itemized list of sins. It's quite gross. Okay, you have bribes, you have oppression of the poor. Verse 7 is probably the wickedest one. It says, those who pant after the very dust of the earth and the head of the helpless. It says, and turn aside from the way of the humble. And the man and the father resort to the same girl. So you can see the immorality when the father and the son are sleeping with the same girl. Gross, gross immorality, drunkenness, and then finally no respect for the house of God. So judgment's coming. And these are the people of Israel. Then the message of doom. So let's turn to, we're just going to highlight one of these, chapter 5, verse 18. How many of you ever heard the day of the Lord? You've heard that phrase, day of the Lord, day of the Lord. And from the Israel's perspective, the day of the Lord, popular thought was that the day of the Lord would actually be a day that they're rescued from their enemies. That God would deliver them. That this would be the day that good wins. All the injustices are made right. This is the day of the Lord. And God basically says, yes, it will be, but not in the way you think it will be. So look in verse 18. Alas, you who are longing for the day of the Lord. Remember, deliver us from our enemies. For what purpose will the day of the Lord be to you? It will be darkness and not light. Then in verse 20, will not the day of the Lord be darkness instead of light, even gloom with no brightness? Why? Because they themselves have sinned. How many of you have ever heard Christians say, God will forgive me? I will be delivered from this. And yet their lifestyle is completely defiant against God. And just because you call yourself a Christian or you've been to church, you think that God owes you this. And this is how the Israelites were thinking at that time. So very tragic. And then we come to the vision of Amos. So let's pick up this. So the first one are obviously 2 very destructive forces, especially in an agricultural environment. So if you are in an agricultural environment and you have locusts coming, go back to the plagues, right? So the locusts come in and they're kind of like our grasshoppers, right? They just, any of y'all seen, what's that animated movie?
Bug's Life?
Yeah. Yeah, Bug's Life. Kind of same picture in a cartoon version where it just kind of sweeps through and just devours everything. So that's the locust. Second is fire, but I want you to see the response. So after the locusts come, Amos sees this. So Amos kind of gets a Netflix preview of the series of God's judgments coming, and he responds. He gives commentary. And his commentary is verse 2. Lord God, please pardon. How can Jacob stand? For he's too small. So what happens? Look at verse 3. The Lord did what? Changed his mind. So prophet interceded, stopped the judgment of God. This is good, right? He stood in the gap. And he says, Israel's too small. They can't handle this. They're already in deep trouble as it is. Don't make it worse. Then the second vision comes in verse 4. Then the Lord God showed me, and behold, the Lord God was calling, and he contended with the fire, and it consumed with great deep, and it began to consume the farmland. And so what does Amos say? Please stop. It's too much. We can't take it. And what does the Lord do? change his mind. So two very destructive forces where God can use judgment through nature, whether it's through fire or whether it's through locusts. Now we come to the hard one in verse 7. Then he showed me, behold, the land, the Lord was standing by a vertical wall with a plumb line in his hand. Any of y'all know what a plumb line is? So one summer, I did survey. And I was the peon, so that means I got to stand in places no one else wanted to stand to hold the rod. And it was usually in the swamp where snakes were, or it was in Port Arthur, so you know where the chemical waste dump, and they put you on these mounds where they dump things, and steam, smoke's coming up, and it can't be healthy. I'm holding the pole because no one else wants to go in a chemical waste dump holding the pole. And so, but in the middle of all that, a lot of times we had to drop a line, and so we had a plumb line. And it drops it down that way. We knew it was going to be a straight vertical drop. So that's how it was introduced, a plumb line. So here we go. And he says, Amos, what do you see? And he says, a plumb line. So he knows what it is. Then verse 8, it says, behold, I'm about to put a plumb line in the midst of my people Israel, and I will spare them no longer. And then it goes through, and Amos has no response. What does that mean? It means that he showed him how crooked Israel was. And the third vision, it clicked. He can't intercede for them anymore. He finally understands what God is trying to convey to him. So it's a very powerful image. Again, locusts consuming all the crops, fire consuming all the land, and then he begs. God relents. But then he comes down to the plumb line, and it all clicks. When God shows himself like this, it puts everything in the right perspective. And so this is the judgment. And then the basket of summer fruit, not that familiar with that, but it's the fruit at the end of the summer. And what it means is the end is coming. And then God is at the altar of the temple. And once he's there, no one's able to escape. So this is Amos, the prophecy, okay? Any questions on this at all? All right. I think we're going to stop here because the next one is Isaiah. And let me tell you, Isaiah's thick. And we've been at it for an hour and 15 minutes. And you do not want to jump into Isaiah with 75 minutes worth of sitting still. So we're going to come in next week and we'll come in fresh. But thank you so much for being here today.